The iPhone 15 Pro is literally 1 month away from launch, with September 12th being the suspected Apple event date, but the biggest leak of all came from Unknowns21, where he just revealed a bunch of new exclusive info about the 15 Pro's brand new A17 chip. So in this video, I'm actually going to use the info that he gave us to try and calculate the expected performance of the new A17 and see if it matches the leaked benchmarks that have already come out, or if it's actually gonna be a bit of a disappointment instead. So jumping right into it, here's the tweet from Unknowns21 showing that the A17 chip is coming with 6 cores for both the CPU and the GPU. Now this first part is very interesting because the current A16 chip has 6 CPU cores, but only 5 graphics cores, so we're getting an extra GPU core, which is great, but the CPU layout is staying the same with 2 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, which will be very important for calculating the performance. But moving further into his tweet, he revealed that the clock speed of the A17's performance cores is 3.70 gigahertz, which is actually a bit less than I expected for a couple of reasons. But before I explain why, the disappointing detail he revealed was that the A17 will apparently have the same 6 gigabytes of the same LPDDR5 RAM as we currently have on the A16, with no changes at all, while everybody was expecting the switch to 8 gigs. So that's definitely a bit disappointing, and it'll likely lead to a little bit less performance gains. Now getting back to explaining the significance of that 3.7 gigahertz clock speed, it's a bit disappointing considering the fact that this will be the world's first 3nm chip with even smaller transistors that'll be much more efficient, but it seems like Apple isn't pushing these cores anywhere near their limits. And how do I know? Well, because that 3.7 gigahertz clock speed is only 6.94% higher than the clock speed of the A16 chip, which sat at 3.46 gigahertz. However, the A16's clock speed boost compared to the older A15 was basically the same difference, being 6.79% higher than the A15. Almost the same performance boost as we're getting with the new leaked A17 chip. And the reason that's so important and interesting is that the A15 and A16 chips are both essentially 5nm chips, with the A16 being built with an upgraded 3rd generation process that TSMC actually marketed as 4nm, while not actually being real 4nm at all. It was just 3rd gen 5nm. So it's really quite disappointing to see only a 6.94% clock speed boost on the new 3nm A17, which basically proves that Apple is intentionally limiting the clock speeds compared to its true potential, probably because they want to save some of that extra potential for next year's A18 chip, which will also be a 3nm chip. So what it seems like Apple is essentially doing is splitting the new 3nm performance gains between the 2 chip generations to make both the A17 and A18 seem like a great jump in performance, instead of pushing the A17 to the limits, leaving nothing left behind for the A18 and making it look a bit disappointing. So because of that, we shouldn't expect anything too crazy from the A17, and definitely not as good as the old leaked A17 chip benchmark from TechRev. And that's probably why he came out later and said that the gains are actually disappointing compared to what he previously expected. So with that said, let's jump into calculating the benchmark performance numbers of the A17 Bionic chip, starting with the CPU side first before moving on to the graphics. The most important thing you need to know is that although the A16 chip's clock speed was just 6.79% higher than the A15, when we compare the actual performance difference in Geekbench 6's single core test, the A16 actually scores 11.15% higher than the A15. So the extra 4.36% on top of the clock speed gains comes from other improvements like chip design differences, cache upgrades, RAM improvements like how the A16 moved to LPDDR5 from LPDDR4X, and more. Now, as far as calculating the performance of the A17 chip, we should definitely expect at least the same single core gain that we got with the A16, which was 11.15%. But because this 3nm chip tech has been so hyped up, I would expect Apple to redesign the performance cores with even more cache. So if I had to make a conservative guess, I'd put the A17 chip at being 15% faster than the A16 in single core. That right there gives us a Geekbench 6 single core score of 2,890, which is the minimum we should expect, and that's only because the clock speed difference isn't as high as we thought, especially with Tech Reeve's comments on the new 3nm chips being a bit disappointing. And now, as far as the multi-core performance, the A16 chip was around 16.6% faster than the A15, even though they both shared the same chip layout of 2 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, which actually ran at basically the same clock speed of just over 2 GHz. So even with the E cores running at the same speed, the clock speed boost of the 2 performance cores alongside other cache improvements led to a 16.6% performance boost, which is pretty impressive. But with the new A17 chip, I'm expecting Apple to boost the performance of the efficiency cores probably up to around 2.2 GHz, basically representing a 10% boost in efficiency core clock speed. And because of that, if we wrap everything up together, I'd expect at least a 20% multi-core gain on the A17 chip compared to the A16. And that's the conservative guess, leaving us with around 7,628 multi-core points, making it almost as fast as Apple's M1 chip in a smartphone, which is insane. Now, if Apple has more tricks up their sleeve, like a huge boost in cache, we could even see up to a 25% boost, but that would put the A17 in line with the M1, which honestly just seems a bit unrealistic, and Apple surely would want to save some of that potential for next year, so sticking to a 20% boost is the most likely outcome. And now, with the CPU performance out of the way, let's get into the graphics. The most important new detail to remember is that the A17 chip will now come with an extra GPU core, up to 6 total compared to 5 on the A16. That right there is basically 20% more cores, so whatever GPU gains we come up with, we need to add 20% no matter what because of that extra core. So right off the bat, let's grab the A16's metal score in Geekbench 6 of 22,292 and add 20%, which now gives us 26,750. But on top of that, we're of course expecting Apple to boost the clock speeds of those cores as well, so let's calculate that. But first, there was another very interesting detail that was confirmed by GeekerOne, and that's the fact that Apple literally reused the same exact GPU from the A15 chip on the new A16, but they simply overclocked the cores from 3.2 GHz to 3.5, which is basically 9.375% higher, which ultimately led to a Geekbench 6 metal score that was 11% faster. Now, the reason Apple reused the same GPU is because apparently Apple was planning a fully redesigned GPU with brand new cores and maybe even hardware ray tracing for the A16 chip, but it wasn't ready on time, so they ditched those plans and they reused the same GPU from the A15. Now this year, I'm expecting those new GPU cores to be ready for the A17, and I think it would make sense for Apple to up the clock speeds from 3.5 GHz to around 3.8, which represents an 8.57% boost. And since the previous 9.375% clock speed boost on the A16 led to an 11% faster metal score, we can probably expect the A17 chip's 8.57% clock speed boost to improve performance scores by 10%. So applying that 10% gain to the 26,750 metal points that we calculated, including the extra GPU core, we're looking at a final estimated metal score of 29,425 for the A17 chip. So in the end, it's looking like the A17 will be around 32% faster than the A16, which scored 22,292 points, making the new A17 chip's GPU almost as fast as the M1 chip, which is super impressive in a smartphone. So with that said, those are the conservative numbers, and there's a chance they could get even better if the new GPU redesign is a bigger deal than we expected, or if Apple decides to push a bit more performance into the A17. But just to recap the numbers once again, I'm predicting a single core score of 2,890, a multi-core score of 7,628, and a metal score of 29,425 for the new A17 chip. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, let me know your thoughts on these performance numbers down below, and be sure to subscribe above and check out my M3 Max chip calculations video right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.